If you have questions, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A at any time, and we'll ask them at the end. I have enabled the live captioning, so if you would like to see that and you're not seeing it already, you're going to click the CC button or the More button, and then click Show Captions. If you are seeing them and don't want to see them, you'll click the CC button or the More button and click Hide Captions. It's fairly easy to use. If you have any problems with connection at any time, please call the reference desk at the library, or you can chat them online through our website. And then a little bit about our speaker today. So Tina is the owner of Tamarack Genealogy. She holds a Master's of Library and Information Science degree with a specialization in archives and preservation from Dominican University. She has won multiple research and digitization grants over the years to preserve and digitize historic documents and photographs. She lectures nationally on topics including genealogical methodology, military records, Scottish research, and archival preservation, and has assisted researchers for over 20 years, and still occasionally finds time to conduct her own family research, which she has been pursuing for over 30 years. So she's got a lot of experience to share with us. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much. I am delighted that all of you are on with us today. Thank you for our digression to talk about plants there while everybody was coming in. See, she mentioned the plant swap and it was just off and running. We're going to talk about school records today, so I'm delighted that you are all here. I am going to turn my camera off, one, to save bandwidth, and two, so you could see my full screen, because I'm going to show you a lot of pictures, full screen pictures and things like that. I will turn my camera back on when we are done for the Q&A. Feel free to put any questions you have in the Q&A. We'll cover those when we're all finished. And then in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so each of us has been to school, whether we've gone to a public school or a private school or a religious institution, whether that is kindergarten through doctorate. Each one of those levels is going to have records that are going to be available to you. So whether you as the student want to obtain copies of your previous school records, or whether you as a researcher want to acquire school records on your ancestors and your family, I'm going to give you some suggestions and some tips on how to do that. So we're going to cover not all of these topics in depth, but these are some of the things that you are going to be looking for as you are collecting this family history. So we have to keep in mind too, as genealogists, we're not just genealogists, we're family historians. We want to be able to tell our family, our ancestors' lives in the context of the world that surrounded them. And school was such a big part of so many of their lives that you are going to find them referenced in all of these types of things. So we're going to talk about the personal type of records, those individual type documents, diplomas, awards, but then we're going to be talking about societal, about local history, about public history type records as well. So those are going to be things that they're involved in, like class photos where there's multiple students, alumni directories, yearbooks, programs and events that are sponsored that include, you know, dozens or hundreds of students. So you have to think of them and how they interacted with their school and how the school itself interacted with the community surrounding them. So that would include things like alumni directories. We've all gotten those calls from our schools saying, for $80, you can put your name in our book and we'll give you a copy. Sometimes they typically will list full inventories of class graduates. So you'll be able to not necessarily know what year somebody graduated, but you could see if they graduated because they would show up in the directory by class. Things like awards, you know, were they class valedictorian? Were they spelling bee champ? Were they high school baseball champions? Those kinds of things. Class photos, if you can find them, I'm going to talk about those in more detail in just a couple of minutes. That individual level coursework, tests, papers, if you're lucky enough that somebody in the family still kept those items. And then things like graduation announcements, both the individual cards that families would mail out to friends and family, as well as the announcements that would show up in the local newspaper. I'm going to talk about those closer to the end. Things like histories and directories, we're going to talk about this public history aspect of this, how you can utilize newspapers and county histories to find out more about school histories and school districts. Those programs and events, again, would show up in that public history newspapers, yearbooks, like homecoming. They're gonna include stuff like that. If you're lucky enough that the family kept their report cards, that's wonderful, but you also can potentially get copies of transcripts as well, where you don't have the individual quarterly or semester report cards, but you could obtain transcripts from the school or the district. School schedules I'm going to talk about in depth, and those are school censuses that government entities would do for all school-age children of a certain age, between certain ages. I'm going to talk about that towards the end as well when I talk about community and county and township records. And then yearbooks, we're going to spend some time covering that as well. So where would we find these types of things that I talked about? You have to think about searching for school records on like a dartboard or onion, where you're peeling back the layers. So the core of that, or the bullseye, is going to be the school itself. If the school still exists, you're going to reach out to them and ask them if they have copies of the information you seek. If they don't, I'm going to extend and widen my circles. I'm going to reach out to the school district office. If the school district office, like Elmhurst School District 305, I think you guys are 305. If 305 doesn't have anything, then I'm going to reach out to the Regional Board of Education. So I'm going to contact the DuPage County Regional Board of Ed. If they don't have anything, or I've used those records, but now I'm still looking for more, I'm going to extend that circle to include the county, on the county level. And those are going to be things like tax records. Those are going to be things like those school censuses I'm talking about. Those are going to be things like election results for elected school board members and superintendent. Township office, same thing. I'm going to check and see if they have any of those tax records. I'm going to reach out to the public library. I'm going to reach out to the historical society in that local region to see if they have class photos, if they have teacher books, if they have records. I'm going to check to see if there are any archives, whether that's the college archive, whether that's a community archive, whether that's the state archive. And then lastly, I'm going to kind of look on the national level. So I'm going to look at newspaper resources. I'm going to look at online resources like Ancestry or FamilySearch. I'm going to look at National Archives or Library of Congress and see if they have things. So you're going to keep widening that circle to try to catch as many additional records as you can. So like I said, if you're lucky enough that you have these already in your family collections, you're already halfway there to meeting your goal, because it's going to give you the date, it's going to give you the information about the class, it's going to tell you who the graduating students were, it's going to tell you who the teachers or professors were. So these are a couple of examples from our Historical Society collection in Plainfield. So you can see we've got 1916 commencement event programs, we've got 1908 high school commencement and baccalaureate exercise programs as well. Keep in mind, the further back you go, baccalaureate and graduation commencement are not the same thing. Baccalaureates were usually done the day before, and that's where you'd hear public speeches and things like that. There was usually a prayer that was associated with it. Definitely has a little bit more of a religious bent to it. And then the graduation, the commencement exercises were on a different day. So don't be surprised if you have one or the other, or maybe you're even lucky enough to have both. But when you're looking at online resources, when you're looking through newspapers and things like that, keep in mind different words, different terms were used at different points throughout history. So it doesn't hurt to look for graduation, but you're probably going to want to look for commencement. You're going to want to look for baccalaureate as well, because maybe they've reported on both of those events. Like I had said a minute ago, class photos, if you can find them, are really just a gem. Not every school has them on file. I reached out to my grade school. I went to Butterfield Elementary School in Lombard, and they do not have any class photos. So then the hunt became, okay, can I reach out to the Lombard Historical Society? Can I reach out to the DuPage County Historical Society? Can I reach out to DuPage County Board of Education? So sometimes your school does not have them, but you want to utilize those other reference points that I gave you. And back when I was young, I don't know about the rest of you, you'd stand on risers, and the short kids, I was always in the front. Short kids are always in the front. You know, tall kids are always in the back. And it's a snapshot in time. You know, if you're blinking, if you're scratching your nose, that's the photo that gets saved. Nowadays, you get little headshots where, you know, you get a chance to retake your photo, and they'll do that before. I miss having everybody lined up together because you see how classmates interacted with each other. You know, usually you would group together with your closest friends, and those would be the people you'd be standing next to. It wasn't always alphabetical by name. So you kind of lose that social context when you have the individual headshots. But if you're lucky enough that candid photos exist, and usually a lot of times in yearbooks and things like that, you can find those candids where kids are just around town or in the building, the school building, or maybe outside on the grounds, you know, playing softball or whatever it happens to be. Candids tell you a lot about how they spent their school years. You know, were they, you know, members of clubs? I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. You know, who were their friends? Because when you're taking a photo, like a candid photo, you know, usually you're amongst friends. Who was within their social circle? Yearbooks are great for that type of information. If you're not lucky enough that you have those already in your collection, that's when you're going to reach out to those third-party entities like the Historical Society, the library, the local archives, or something like that. But believe it or not, there are a lot of online resources that you can use, like class reunion sites. FamilySearch has a photos collection where individual people can upload family photos. Those are on there. Internet Archive is another really good source. So, you know, when you've extinguished all of the options for you locally, sometimes you can go onto these national sites and see if you can find them. So this is an example of one of the ones that I have in my personal collection from the Tamarac's one-room school. This is the 7th grade class. It's roughly about 1922, 1923. We're not 100% certain, but you can kind of see who the students are within the class, and you get a feel for what everyday life was like for them. Here's another example of one. This is out of a scrapbook from our Historical Society, where this was a teacher who kept scrapbooks each year for her students, which was absolutely wonderful. So keep that in mind too. If you're doing research on your family, don't reach out to a historical society or a library and say, I'm looking for information on Harley Sugar, because they might come back and say, well, we don't have anything on a Harley Sugar. Remember that onion, remember that bullseye. Okay, well, Harley was a student in Lombard School. Do you have anything on the Lombard School? And they might say, yes, we have a folder on Lombard School. And you could go and take a look through those photos. And sure enough, there might be pictures of Harley Sugar in there, but they weren't indexed down to the individual level. So you want to keep that in mind. Or do you have anything on District 202? Oh yeah, we've got a lot of photos on District 202. Okay, I'm going to come in and I'm going to take a look. Because every historical society, every library, every archives has photo collections that are unidentified. We know it's a school. We know it's a local school. We have absolutely no idea which school, which class, which students this might happen to be. So I always ask when I visit one of these organizations, do you have school photos that are unidentified? And they always kind of give me a side eye like, yeah, why do you want to know? Because if I know what my uncle looks like, or my dad, or me personally, I can spot them in a photo. And then not only do they have a name for a person, but they also have a year and a context as well. That's my dad. My dad went to DePaul High School before it became DePaul University. And now they have an answer and you have a photo. So always ask to see those unidentified pictures, because it could be the key that you've been looking for. Talked about those headshots that they do now. It all comes full circle, right? So this is the Joliet Township class of 1914. This is an enormous photo poster that they have on the wall at the Joliet Area History Museum downstairs in their meeting room. It's probably 34 by 28. It's enormous, but it is the senior class of Joliet Township High School. Luckily, you see in this picture, it's just headshots. There's no names. I have no idea who any of these students are. But luckily, they did have a yearbook that was published for 1914 with the exact same photos. So I can go through the yearbook and match up, like a giant game of memory, these photos with the photos out of the yearbook. So sometimes you'll get a class photo, sometimes you'll get a yearbook, sometimes you'll get both, which is absolutely wonderful. Something I want you to keep in mind: in smaller, more rural communities, Plainfield is a perfect example of this. Plainfield did not have a 4-year high school. You went to school for 3 years. And if you decided that you wanted to complete your 4th year because you were intending to go to college, then you would do that 4th year someplace else. And that someplace else for us was Joliet Township High School. So we had a lot of students who went through their first 3 years at Plainfield and then did their final year at Joliet Township High School so they could move on to go to college. So keep that in mind. You might want to investigate whether the area where you're doing your family research had that same type of program where they could do an extended year in order to get that education to go on to college. In Will County, I put out a call to DuPage County Regional Board of Education as well, but I haven't gotten, sadly, a response back, which kind of get it. School started this week. When schools consolidated in the late 1940s, early 1950s in Illinois, the Will County Regional Board of Education went around to all the one-room schoolhouses and took a photo of the building and then a photo of that very last class. And they had those in their collections and they made them available on CD-ROMs to anybody who was interested. So our library has a copy of it. And it's all of the remaining schools before they were being shut down and consolidated into districts. So whether it was District 308, whether it was District 202, whether it was District 87, they went around to all of these different places. Now, the downside is I don't have the name of the teachers and I don't have the name of the students, but I do have the photos. And then here's where newspapers or your local library or historical society can come in handy. If your newspapers are digitized online, you could do a search for this school when you know the year that the school is closing and see if it gives you a name of the teacher at the very least, or a roster of students that you can then compare the photo to as well. So we're blessed in our county that this took place. Fortunately, I don't have an answer whether or not DuPage County did this, but it's certainly something, especially for those of you who might be researching out of state, reach out to those different levels that I talked about to see if they do have a similar program. But it's just wonderful. Look at these adorable little faces. So expanding on the idea of photos, we're going to talk about yearbooks. And I want you to think of yearbooks as more than just students and teachers. Yearbooks offer so much additional information. Every yearbook I've ever seen always has a business advertisement section in the back, even my high school yearbooks as well. They would send students from the yearbook committee out into the community to sell advertising to cover the costs of producing the yearbook. And those business advertisements sometimes are just congratulations class of 1973 in the name of the business, but sometimes they're photos of the business outside, inside. So if you have a family member who owned a business, they could have very easily have run an ad in the yearbook for decades. And you can get interior and exterior shots and how that building had evolved over the years simply by going through the annual yearbooks. They would include photos of downtown. They would include photos of school and around campus and just out and about within the public. So you might be able to find pictures of houses, pictures of businesses, pictures of downtown or the outside of the school as well. They would have military service photos and announcements because they would be proud of those soldiers, sailors, and nurses that served from their school or from their nearby area. And they would usually include some kind of information about where they are or what branch of service that they're in. Memorials would include teachers and students. If somebody died unexpectedly or a beloved janitor or bus driver passes away, a lot of times there would be a memorial in the yearbook, either in, the addendum that would come at the end of the school year or in the following year's yearbook as well. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as well. A couple of things about yearbooks that I want to point out. These go back all the way into the 19th century. You'll find them as early as the 1880s and 1890s. But historically, they were called annuals, not yearbooks. So when you're searching online research tools like Internet Archive, HathiTrust, Google Books, when you're looking for these early yearbooks, you want to make sure you're looking for annuals. If you know the name of the yearbook, that's fantastic. You can search for the ILIO. You can search for whatever the name of the yearbook happens to be, the SPROG, and you might be able to find them online. Here's some examples of places where you can find those. MyHeritage and Ancestry are both by subscription, but the rest of these sites are available for free. You can sign in with an account through classmates.com and search yearbooks across the country. It doesn't have to just be your class or your high school. These are available nationwide and you have access to these. I'm going to show you a couple of examples. So here in Plainfield High School Yearbook, which began in 1949, included first grade through 12th grade. So be very conscious when you are looking for yearbooks in your community that they might include more than just 9th grade through 12th grade. Plainfield is a fantastic example of that. From 1949 until 1973, all of those years were included in the same, quote, high school yearbook. In 1974, they split off and there was a K through 8 yearbook and then a high school yearbook. But up until that time, they were all together. So I can follow a student from first grade to 12th grade. Kindergarten didn't begin in Plainfield until 1953. So from 49 to 52, it's just first grade through 12th grade. But beginning in 53, it's kindergarten through 12th grade. And I can follow somebody through their entire career. Same thing is true for Joliet Township High School. Joliet Township included Joliet Junior College yearbook students from the 1950s until 1969. And then beginning at that time, Joliet Junior College started having its own yearbook. So sometimes you'll find some really extra things in there, like this woman on the right-hand side. She's a senior, but she's not a high school senior. She's taking extra classes at Joliet Junior College, and she's represented in the yearbook. So we have to get out of our minds that we're only looking for 9th grade through 12th grade. There's so much more that a yearbook can include that we just don't necessarily think of when we get started. So always keep that in mind. You might find some really great things. But think of people that are associated with the school as well. Don't just be looking for students. Were they teachers? Were they administrators? Were they bus drivers? Were they lunch ladies? Were they janitors? All of those people are going to be represented in the yearbook as well. So if you had a family member who was lunch lady for 15 years, every year she's going to have a photo in the yearbook as well. Like I said, those business advertisements you'll be able to find in your yearbook. You could tell these kids are not digging having to, pose to have the business advertisement taken. But here's an example of what you would find. Like I said, military information would be included in the yearbook, especially during the Second World War in Korea. You'll find a lot of these. Don't see as much of it during the Vietnam War, but you will see it listed in annuals from the First World War as well. But this is from Turner High School in Kansas City, and they're referencing William Copenhagen. Does he look like he graduated the year before? To me, it looks like he's 35. But my interest was in James Hugh Craig. So in the yearbook for the class of 1946, there's a photo of Jimmy in his sailor's uniform. Tells me when he entered the Navy, what his class, his rank is. It tells me where he was stationed. It tells me that he's now in the hospital in Jacksonville, Florida. All of that is incredibly useful information for me to go look in other sources to find out more. But it tells me he's the class of 1940. Why I laugh and say that this is my favorite entry is because Jim didn't even go to Turner High School in Kansas City. He went to a completely different high school on the other side of town. His sister Lorraine was in the class of 1946 for Turner High School. So Lorraine made sure that her brother, who was a high school graduate, just not a Turner High School graduate, was represented in the yearbook because he was currently serving in the Navy. So I love the fact that Lorraine wanted to include her brother, but it makes me laugh because he didn't even go to that high school, but he is included in that high school yearbook. So sometimes you find some gems like that. Same thing is true for college yearbooks as well. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So this one on the left-hand side, this is from New Trier High School. This is the yearbook for the class of 1944. And they're telling me as of May 1st, 1944, these are all of the people who are currently enlisted in the military. Now, this came out May 1st, 1944, and you see that I highlighted Oswald listed there. Oswald Asplund was listed as being killed in action or killed during their military service. I'm going to come back to Oswald towards the end when I talk about newspapers. So just kind of keep Oswald in the back of your mind. Alumni directories for college yearbooks as well. So whether you're a Cornhusker or whether you're a Jayhawker, there could potentially be listings of alumni in the back of those yearbooks. North Central College in Naperville originally started in Plainfield. They included for several years a list of all of the alumni that had graduated from that school. So I don't necessarily, again, need to know the year. I can just grab a yearbook at random and look to see if the graduating classes and see if my family member is listed in those, as well as those directories that you pay to include your information in as well. So this Nebraska State University yearbook from 1923 includes alumni from previous years in that single year's yearbook. So now let's talk about those records outside of the individual student, those books that would include public history that would deal with the community at large. So those would be things like tax assessments, annual tax assessments, those school schedules, the censuses I was referring to. I'm going to show you some examples of those. The individual teachers' registers, those log books that the teachers use to keep track of student progress throughout the course of the year. School tax records as well. How is the school paying their maintenance workers, their grounds crews, their teachers? They would have to file their tax records with the state as well in the county. Those annual reports that the Board of Education puts out about teacher salaries and staff salaries, all of that can include information about your family member in their association with the school or the district. So tax records would include not only real estate tax, but also personal property tax. And this is an example of one from Mokena Township in Illinois from 1883. People who owned their property would pay the real estate tax, but everybody would pay personal property tax. So if I'm a renter, if I'm living with somebody in some other capacity, I'm still paying personal property tax. And that would include things like livestock, how many hogs, how many chickens, how many cows do I have? It would include household goods, like, do you have a sewing machine? Do you have clocks or watches? It would include Illinois taxed you if you had a dog. So if you had a dog, you paid a tax. But it would also include the school district tax. How much were you paying to the school district, and what school district were you paying to, which is phenomenal. So if you're doing research and tax records are available to you, whether it's online or whether it's in person, and you have to reach out to the county or the township, in the personal property section in the back would be where you would find the school districts listed. And I could see here that Henry Dirks is paying to school district number 1. I can see that Elias, Salarius is paying to school district number 2. So you want to make sure that you are looking at these tax records, because that's going to tell you right away what district you're paying into and where I can go to look for those records. These are at the State Archives in Springfield. The original school minutes from the establishment of the school district in DuPage Township, Will County, not DuPage County, but DuPage Township in Will County. So in 1847, Illinois passed a law establishing school districts, and the very first school censuses were done that year to establish how many students would be available per district. You had to have a minimum of 10 students in order to have an eligible school district. In those school districts, the schools needed to be within 2 miles. So students in that district would have to live within a 2 square mile radius to be able to access the school. Well, a lot of schools kept their notes on the establishment of the district, and this is an example of one. So how did you pay? You paid based on how valuable your land was. And in this particular instance, in Barber's Corners, which is what eventually became the city of Bolingbrook, they had the farmers pay based on what the value of their land was. And everybody was in favor of establishing a district, except for the Barber brothers, who owned, quote unquote, Barber's Corners, which became Bolingbrook. So you can see that they were fighting because they didn't want to have to pay the tax, and they were overruled, and they wound up establishing the school district anyway. But you can see that, they appointed a superintendent, they appointed a librarian, Here are the names of the people who voted in favor of the tax, and John Barber as being the one who objected. So check with your local archives, your local historical society, see if they have these records. If not, here's an example of one that's available through the Illinois State Archives. Maps and plats are a great resource as well. So here's an example of two from McHenry County that show me where the one-room schoolhouses are. I kind of circled that. I apologize, it's blurry on your screen. But when the districts were established, they had to be within 2 miles. So you can kind of see, if you look at this map, you know, there's a school just north of Marengo. There's another school in section 20. There's another school above that. Each one is about 2 miles apart. And then for community schools that are within urban centers, here's an example of a map showing here's where the public school is in downtown Crystal Lake. And you can see where that school is. So these maps are really useful in helping you understand where is District 1, where is District 2, and how does that relate to where my family was living at the time. So using those land maps and those county plat maps in tandem with the tax records that tell me the school districts can help me pinpoint exactly where I'm looking. These are all public record. So let's talk for a second about school schedules. So these are absolutely miraculous if you can find them. I have seen them in multiple states. They are not just an Illinois type of record, everything from, you know, North Dakota to Tennessee. You're going to be able to look for these records. And it would list children of school age, and that could be anywhere from 5 years to 21 years. That could be 4 years to 20 years. It depends on what the regulation was that they set up in their state. So in Illinois, they go from 5 to 21. In Kansas and Nebraska, where I've used these records, they go from 5 to 21. So this doesn't mean that you were in school. It does not mean you were enrolled in school. They were just doing an assessment to find out how many students could they potentially have to include in the school district if they were going to attend. So they needed to make sure they had schools big enough to house them. These records can include anywhere from age to the siblings that are attending, the name of the parent or guardian, what class or grade they're in, what their address is. More recent ones include date of birth. These are phenomenal records. I even have one in my family where I have the mother who's 21 and her 5-year-old daughter, and both of them are listed under the head of household, which is her husband. So, I mean, there's some really good stuff in these. Like I said, in Illinois, they begin in 1847 is when the law passes. So you'll find these records from 1848 forward. Illinois did not start requesting births and deaths until November 1st of 1877. So these are 30 years before the state starts asking for birth records. So if you're lucky enough that you can find them in your community, they're going to have a tremendous amount of information in them. Here's an example of one. I realize this is hard to see, but this is the establishment of the Mokena School District. This is the first census that was conducted in 1847. And you can see the list of students there. I have 10 students. I can see that they're 4 years old, 6 years old, 4 years old, 6 years old, 4 years old, 10 years old, and then 1 year old. I assure you, William Saring is 1 year old. This is not first grade, fourth grade, sixth grade, because on the 1850 census, he is still alive and he is listed as being 4 years old. So they were desperate to form this school. So they were looking for any child. You can see they don't even meet the 5-year-old establishment recommendation, but they needed to find one more kid to have a viable school district. So William Saring became number 10 to establish district number 4 school. Here's another example. This one is from Frankfurt Township, 1895. It's divided into boys and girls. This one was done monthly. A lot of schools did them monthly, so you could see how many days students were in attendance. So I can see that Clara Brown was only in school 2 days that entire month, but I can see other students like Peter Newman was in school for 14 days. And it was a way for them to keep track of things like attendance and truancy and things like that. But I've got the name of the student, I've got the age of the student, I have the number of days that they've attended. And this one is signed on the 8th day of February, 1895. The records for Eastern Will County are at the State Archives in Springfield. So you can see the number of districts and the years represented. These aren't one-offs. there are really long spans of school schedules that you can find. District 3 is 1851 to 1898, 1857 to 1895. I mean, these are large collections. But if you don't know whether or not these records existed, you can start by visiting the Illinois State Archives, by reaching out to the IRAD. I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to walk you through how to do that in just a couple of minutes. But you can find out right away whether or not records were turned over to the state. If they were not, that's where you're going to start using that dartboard. I'm going to start with the school. I'm going to look at the school district. I'm going to reach out to the county. I'm going to check other historical societies and genealogical societies to see if they exist. The records that I've researched, that I've done out of state, that I've done in Nebraska, typically are still on the county level. The ones I've looked at in Kansas are typically either given to their local historical societies or available through the state archives. So you just want to kind of look at all of the places where those might be available. Teachers' registers are not required to be turned over. So these, you're reliant on whether or not the teacher or a family member donated them to an organization, whether it's the local historical society, library, or back to the school. They would include the age of the child, what coursework they were currently taking for that level, their attendance in class, and any guests that attend. So sometimes you've got family members who are staying with the family over winter, and maybe those kids are attending school during the winter months. Parents who want to come in and make sure that the kids are learning what they want them to be learning would be listed in the guest book. Special guests, so like if the superintendent or somebody from the state came and visited, they would sign the guest book as well. So it gives you an idea of who's coming and going to the school at any given time as well. So where am I going to look? Like I said, on all of those levels. I'm going to start with the school. I'm going to start with the public library or historical genealogical society, and I'm going to work my way up. These records that I have that came from the Scotch Church School, which is the Wheatland Presbyterian School. It was a one-room schoolhouse in Will County. Their school and Tamarack School, which I showed you the photo of earlier, were found in the garbage. We had a gentleman who is currently the museum manager of the Little White School Museum in Kendall County in Oswego, who had lived and grew up in that area. He was driving one day and saw it was a former estate sale, and the stuff that nobody purchased was just thrown out to the corner. He got out of his car and he started picking through it and found 2 boxes worth of teacher registers from these 2 schools. So he scooped them up, put them in his trunk, drove them to the museum, and they were accessioned into the Little White School Museum in Oswego. The funny thing is Oswego's in Kendall County. These schools are in Will County. The border is like, 50 yards from the school where the county border is. So sometimes you find gems like this in places you weren't expecting them. So keep in mind, if you had a school that was near another county, or it was a tiny school, but there was a big city 20 miles away, see if those records were donated to the big city museum, archives, or library, because there was nothing in that community, no place for them to donate those in their community. But you can see how wonderful these are. I've got a lot of siblings in these records, a couple of cousins, Margaret and Robert Stewart and their cousin Bill Stewart, all attending the same school. I can see their ages from 13 all the way down to 6 years old, how they're doing, what courses they're taking. And then the beauty on the second page is, how did they do in school? Must be made to work, very neat worker, a little slow, but works very hard, very bright, but not as neat about his work, a good worker and bright. So I'm finding out how these students are doing as well. So I get their coursework, I get their age, I can see the connections between family members within the community all attending the same school, but then what kind of student were they as well? Again, another public source would be to use county histories. A couple different examples that I show you here. One's from McHenry County, another one is from Will County, and they're talking about the establishment of the first school and who the first schoolmaster is, maybe who the superintendent of schools is. Maybe they're telling me a little bit about the history of the profession. All of the teachers might be listed, or the first class might be listed. So you've got a couple different examples in there. Harvard High School, students who attended schools would be writing about that in the county history, the start of the school, Like the first school in Homer was taught by DC Baldwin, a veteran and a hardware merchant from Lockport. Tells me exactly where the school was, that it was a little log shanty with a stick chimney. If your family attended that school, that's some really good detail to put into your story about that family member. Let's talk about newspapers. Oh my goodness, all of the information that could be printed in the newspaper, from those who are highly accomplished to, sports stars, dean's list, perfect attendance shows up in the newspaper, different clubs and organizations that somebody belongs to, whether they're in the Future Farmers of America or whether they're in the chess club, the debate team, whatever it happens to be, it's going to show up in the newspaper. Don't just think about high school graduations. Think about promotions from kindergarten to first grade, fifth grade to sixth grade, or eighth grade to ninth grade, college graduations. All of those things would have made it into the newspaper. A lot of times you'll get, for graduating classes, the whole class photo will be included. Any type of reunion or get together, 10th anniversary class reunion, 25th anniversary class reunion, are all going to be listed in the newspaper as well. Our high school had its own newspaper that ran for years. It was published weekly and it was called the High Times. Yes, it makes me chuckle too every time I say it. But they would then, the local newspaper would then take like the highlights from the school newspaper and run it in a single column in the community paper. So if I don't have access to the high school paper, I'm lucky enough that they pulled the important things out of the weekly newspaper and ran it in the community paper as well. In Plainfield, homecoming is its own phenomenon. It attracts thousands of people who come into downtown for the parade, for class reunions that take place, for the football game, all of those things. Every year, Plainfield honors what they call the 50-year class. So let this sink in. So this year's 50-year class is representing the class of 1973. That is way too close to home for me because it's almost within my lifetime. We'll put it that way. So they were going to celebrate that class. So there's going to be a float for that class. It's going to be in the newspaper about that class. They're going to be reporting on the reunion for that class. But then they're also talking about other classes as well, 10th anniversaries, 20th anniversaries. This newspaper article from High Times is published at homecoming, but it's talking about all of the students that had graduated in June. So it's 4 months from when the class let out to homecoming in October. And look at all the names of the girls who got married. So, Miss Cucci is now Mrs. Vincent Monfordini. Eudora Eichelberger is now Mrs. George Monfordini. Verdell Fairweather is now Mrs. Mervyn Old. Employment. Helen Foran is an employee and stenographer for Stone and Webster. I'm going to go look for business records now. Eva Glasgow is now Mrs. Courtney Smith. Dorothy Becker is now Mrs. Walter Newman. Nellie Lambert is now Mrs. Nadelhofer. In 4 months, I don't need to know when somebody got married. This is telling me within 4 months. Now I can narrow down my search to find a marriage certificate, a marriage announcement, honeymoon announcement, bridal shower announcement. All of that stuff will be in the newspaper, and I have a 4-month window in which I can search for it. Talking about those 50-year classes, in Plainfield, they didn't have a photo of the class of 1910 to be honored as the 50-year class in 1960. So they wound up running their first grade class photo. I'm going to show that to you on the next slide. Remember I talked about Oswald Asplund, that as of May 1st, 1944, those were the people who were currently serving in the military. Oswald Asplund was killed 5 days before May 1st. It ran in the newspaper at the end of April. So his little asterisk in the New Trier High School yearbook, that was fresh. They had just found out that their classmate had been killed. So I can imagine how raw that must have been to have to put an asterisk next to his name. But the local newspaper ran the article saying that his fiance was at home finding out that her love Oswald had been killed in an accident. Other things you'll find in the newspaper: co-valedictorians give speech at high school graduation. You'll find things like graduation announcements for individual family members who might be hosting a party. You'll find information about students who won awards at graduation. And this one in the bottom corner, Oscar Baker. If I'm looking for Oscar Baker and I automatically go to the newspaper for 1918 thinking Oscar would have been 18, he would have been graduating, I would have missed this. Oscar never graduated. A little tiny blurb at the bottom of a page in the local newspaper said, Oscar Baker has quit school and will motor to Flint, Michigan with Stanley Heron, where both boys expect to get positions in the carpentry line. Never graduated. But there are 4 pieces of information there that I can then trace. I've got his name. I know that he went to Flint, Michigan. I know that he went with his best friend, Stanley Heron, and I know that they wanted to get jobs in the carpentry line. So I'm going to be looking for censuses, newspapers, business records. Maybe they apprenticed or maybe there's employment records somewhere for them. But looking for a graduation announcement is never going to happen because he never finished school. So sometimes we can't just jump to the assumption of when they would have graduated. We need to look for other things in between. Here's that class. Nobody had a photo of the class of 1910. So this photo, which ran in 1960, October 6, 1960, is from a photo that was taken in 1899. This is priceless. And what's even more priceless about this is the fact that every single student, except for one, in this photo is listed in this newspaper article. So if I've got an online index and I'm searching for my family member, don't narrow yourself down to date of death. So if I know that Lou Tower died in 1953, I would miss this gem if I was searching only up to 1953. There were 3 students in this photo, adults, who had passed away before 1960. I wouldn't have found them. So always cast a wider net. Always just do a search and see what comes up, because every newspaper runs a quote unquote back in the day column. 25 years ago, 50 years ago, 75 years ago. You'll often find people referenced long after they died because they get picked up by these back in the day columns. But this is absolutely priceless that nobody had a photo. And the funny thing is, the class of 1910 only had 11 students in it. So the 30 plus students that are in this photo, only 1/3 of them actually graduated. Either they had dropped out of school, they had gotten married, they had moved out of town, or they had passed away. Only 11 of them made it to graduation, but they are all included in this photo from 1960. Aren't they just absolutely priceless? So now let's talk about where I can look for those school schedules. So if you haven't been to what used to be Cyberdrive, Illinois, it is now ilsos.gov for Illinois Secretary of State. The way it looks has changed. Alexi Giannoulias has freshened up the website, so you'll no longer see Jesse White's smiling face, but the layout is still the same, even though it looks slightly different. You're still going to go up to departments in the upper corner. You're still going to choose the Illinois State Archives as your department. And when you click on that link, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll come to a box like this, where it says, search our databases, look at township maps, and then Illinois Regional Archives depositories. So the state archives has 7 regional repositories scattered around the state of Illinois, and they're all in public institutions. Northern Illinois records are at NIU. Central Illinois records are either at Illinois State University or University of Illinois Springfield. Eastern, Western, Southern is where you're going to find the bulk of these records. I can go in and I can take a look and search the collection by keyword. So I could say military, I could say probate, or I can search on school to see what kind of school records are out there. So you can kind of see what the breakdowns are. If you're in Cook County, those records are strictly at NEIU off of Bryn Mawr on the north side at Northeastern Illinois University. Otherwise, you can kind of see the counties that are represented and which university they would live. Now, they're just getting back in session because college is just starting next week, so there might not be anybody in the IRAD centers right now. But if you wait a week or two for employees to be trained and then be on site, you can give them a call. You can write them a snail mail letter. They do not have email, so you cannot email them a request, but you could definitely reach out to them. As I said, here's the information on which schools are represented. CyberDrive Illinois still works. You could just crop that out and put ilsos.gov. The link is still the same. This will still take you to where you need to go, and it's in your handout. But at the bottom of the IRAD, it says Local Government Records Database. If I click on that link, it'll take me to the page where I can search for school records. So I went in and just did a search for school. I did not say census. I did not say schedule. I did not say tax records. This is just a snapshot of a very long page that shows me all of the school records that exist. So you could see some are school treasurer's books, some are board minutes, some are plat records, but you'll see schedules and censuses tucked in here as well. You'll see some of those teachers' logbooks listed in here as well that I was talking about, and the number of years that are represented. So I can see that Menard County has school teacher daily registers, like the ones I showed you previously, from 1915 to 1933. And they're at the University of Illinois Springfield, and that's the record number I would use to access them. Or I can see that they've got teacher pension records from 1936 to 46. So if I had a teacher who retired in that time period, or McDonough School Teachers Daily Registers all the way up to 1944, and that's the record collection. So this is just a screenshot. You can go in and look for your county and where you're doing your research and see if it's represented. If it's not represented, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means it's not available through the state archives. That's when you would reach out on the local level to see if they exist. A couple of places where you can go to look. I already mentioned Classmates and Internet Archive. Ancestor Hunt has a collection of school records nationwide that you can look for. If you're doing research in Chicago, there's a link to apply for your own transcripts. I think it's $8 through Chicago Public Schools. One thing I do want to talk about just briefly is the U.S. Department of Education has what's called FERPA. It's the Federal Educational Records Protection Act. And what this means is school districts and government entities are protecting students up until the age of 18. So if I'm looking for records, I need to be able to prove that that person is either no longer living or is above the age of 18 in order to acquire records. You can go to that link. You could learn a little bit more about those regulations. So if you reach out to a school district and you say, oh, I'd like a copy of, my transcripts, if you can prove that you're eligible under FERPA, they will send them to you. You might get a school that comes back and says, well, we can't give you the class records like the teacher's daily logs because there's other students represented there. And we would need to verify all of those students were dead in order to give you access to those. So just be advised if somebody comes back and claims that these records are protected under FERPA, exactly what that means. If these records have been turned over already to a historical society or library, they no longer need to apply by FERPA. FERPA is a protection act that's designed for school entities and government entities. If these records are already out of their collections, then they're going to be available to you. So if you find them at the local library or historical society, then FERPA no longer applies. So let's just talk briefly about some examples online of where I can find these school records. FamilySearch is a really great example because they have international access to school records, not just records within the United States or North America. And you can find them on several levels. You can find them under the book collection. You can find information about schools within the wiki, and you can also find them in their database collection in their every name index. So if I go into FamilySearch and I just do under find a collection and type in school, you can see all of those examples that are listed here. Czech Republic school registers from 1799 to 1953. Australia records, Iowa records, Germany records. All of these are already part of their every name index. I can search it. But you could also check the catalog as well. So most of our libraries are affiliate libraries, so we have access to view the digitized collections on microfilm in our buildings. So if I go into the catalog, I can put in school schedule or school census or just school and see what exists within the catalog collections. And if it's highlighted in blue, I can click on that link and see the details about the records and whether or not I can view the images. So you can see just doing a search on school census brings up 93 different records collections all across the world. Arizona, Wales, Macoupin County, Pennsylvania, Scotland. So this is not just a US thing. Internet Archive is kind of the same way. Remember what I said about using the term annual or yearbook? You want to be conscious of that when you're doing your search. If I'm browsing through record collections, the American Libraries collection has several different collections in them that incorporate school yearbooks, including Carly. If you're familiar with Carly, it's a consortium of academic and research libraries in Illinois. There are dozens of yearbooks that are accessible in there directly through Carly or through Internet Archive. But when I type in yearbook, keep in mind it's searching the metadata. So it's looking for 5 fields: title, author, publisher, location, and date. If I click the radio button just underneath it, and I apologize, it's cut off a little bit here, where it says search all text contents, it's going to search inside every book that they've digitized. So I can search for yearbook just to have the collection of yearbooks come up. But if I'm looking for an individual person or name of a school, I could go into that search text contents and put in Lisle High School and see all of the references in their collection, from county histories to other sources, including yearbooks that would reference Lisle High School or, Lyons Township or whatever it happens to be. So you can search the metadata for yearbook, but also keep in mind that search text contents too, to dig a little deeper. I mentioned Carly already. You could see that within Carly, we've got UIC, Illinois State, Governor State, Northwestern, all of the yearbooks that are in there. They've got over 455 yearbooks that have been digitized. So you could look and see if your family is in there. Now, remember too, they also include things like annual phone directories and university directories as well. So like my brother, who worked for UIC in heating and cooling for 25 years, he just retired. He's going to show up in these school yearbooks and directories as being part of the facilities management team. So, again, employees, teachers, all these people besides just students that'll show up. I did a search on yearbook. I searched on the Presbyterian Nursing Yearbook, the SPROG, which was what eventually became Rush Presbyterian St. Luke. Their nursing yearbooks are digitized and available through Internet Archive. So I can go in and see all of these young, lovely young ladies who graduated from Presbyterian Nursing School in Chicago and look at where they're from. I've got Wisconsin, I've got Indiana, I've got Michigan, I've got Illinois, Indiana. All of these people came from far afield to attend school in Illinois. So this is sometimes where that search text contents comes in handy, because I could put in Evelyn Nelson and Sprague and search text contents and see all the places where she might show up in the various yearbooks. Or I can find people I didn't even know left the state to attend school who are going to show up in other records, county histories, or yearbooks. This is me. This is my second grade class photo from Butterfield Elementary School. My hair is considerably shorter, but otherwise not much has changed. But I am happy to answer any questions. If you have a resource that you like to use that I didn't mention, please, by all means, share it with the rest of us, because everybody benefits from each of our different knowledge sets. But thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
All right, thank you. We do have one question already. Mm-hmm. Where is a good place to find the names of schools?
I would definitely check in city directories. I would check in county histories. I would look in newspapers. I would look to see by the state, because usually the state would put out a roster every year of school districts and schools inventoried. So you can go online and you could do a Google search, but you have to be searching records close to the time period, because schools change names. I went to Butterfield Elementary School, but I grew up on the south side in Bridgeport. My mom went to McClellan Elementary School, which just recently changed its name to Minnie Minoso School. So high school names change. Look in the resources close to that time period. So if they were in school in the aughts, look at city directories in the aughts. If they went to school in the 40s, look at phone directories from the 1940s, and that's where you're going to find the listing.
All right, if there are more questions, you can put them in the chat or the Q&A. While we wait for that, I'm just going to launch an attendance poll real quick. If you can just tell us how many people are watching on your screen, that helps us get more accurate information.
One thing I didn't mention that I want to touch on are religious schools and parochial schools. They're not responsible to file paperwork in the same way that a public school is. So sometimes it becomes a little bit harder to track those school records. If you're lucky enough that it's like the Archdiocese of Chicago, you can reach out to the Archdiocese and ask for a copy. If they're Presbyterian or Baptist or Methodist, you're going to go through the governing organization. So whether that's the Presbytery, whether that's the Synod, you're going to reach out to them and see if they have records on those individual schools. For example, Northwestern University has the Methodist archives, and there's a lot of schools, not only seminary records, but there's some other Methodist school records that are included in that in Chicago. Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia has records on Presbyterian schools. So you just need to figure out what the religious entity was and then follow the food chain for them as well.
Thank you. Just want to let you all know that registration for fall programs opens Saturday at 9 a.m. for most programs. The makery and craft programs will open 2 weeks before each event. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to our website where you can find a virtual version of that newsletter in case you have not received it in the mail yet. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions. So thank you so much for sharing all of that information and the fun pictures as well.
One thing in your handout, there's a separate section at the very bottom about records specific to DuPage County and Elmhurst. So while I might not have included a lot of references to those in my presentation, you have a whole host of links where you can follow up on those particular areas.
That's great. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's always a delight to see you, and hopefully some people will come out for the plant swap later. And then everybody enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. We'll definitely have you back soon.
Have a great day.
All right. Bye, everyone.